Welcome to episode 13 of the Views from 314 Feet podcast on the Pitcher List Podcast Network. My name is Randy Wilkins, and as always, I'm joined by Yankees beat reporter from The Athletic, Chris Kirshner. Chris, how are you?
Still trying to recover after yesterday's Game 7 loss. It was tough. Tough way to end the season.
I truly feel bad for all of you Knicks fans.
No, you don't.
My heart aches for you guys. My heart was breaking as I saw you guys go down by 300 points at one point in that game. The pain just took over, and just felt bad for you guys. Totally horrible for you guys.
It just sucks because the season was so fun, and then literally everybody gets hurt. Like even the guys who are playing, Dante gets hit in the back yesterday. I mean, he obviously still had a good game. Hartenstein, seems banged up. OG, they played him for a couple minutes. He couldn't move. And then Brunson breaks his hand. Mitchell Robinson gets hurt. He's not even, involved in the series. It's just, it sucks that it ended this way, but it was still a really, really fun season. I mean, I'm 31 years old. There haven't been many fun seasons of the Knicks to watch. I mean, the past couple of years with Brunson in the fold has been, exciting, and it's definitely given hope that, the future is bright. But, I go back to some of the Carmelo seasons, like even when they had Carmelo, the team wasn't going anywhere. Like you knew they didn't have any chance of winning. But with this core, they have really good pieces that they can build around, and the contract situations are not discouraging like your Bulls, because they have Zach LaVine. Who the hell is trading for Zach LaVine? So they don't have a guy like that on the roster where you look at it and it's like, damn, this is gonna bog them down. I'm looking at the Phoenix Suns. I saw the other day their GM James Jones said they're not trading Kevin Durant, Bradley Beal, or Devin Booker. And just from my background covering the NBA, it's that team's going nowhere. I don't care who's coming in to coach. They hired Mike Budenholzer, but when you look at the depth they have zero depth behind those guys. It takes more than three guys to win in the NBA these days. The super team era, in my opinion, is done. You need a lot of depth to win, and the Suns don't have it. And that gives me hope that the Knicks can do something in the near future, just with the good depth and the contracts that they have on the books. So, I'm encouraged about the future, and I haven't really had the opportunity to say that many times in my life when it comes to the Knicks.
Well, that's good. I know it's a little shot at the Bulls, but I'm only a Bulls fan really at this point out of sheer loyalty to myself, my younger self. They're a disaster. So anytime someone mentions the Bulls to me, I'm like, yeah, I agree with you. They're terrible. They're a joke. The biggest news for them is hiring experienced assistants. That's the news that we get. I mean, the Bulls are terrible. I don't know if I'm old school or whatever it is. I don't really want to jump ship. You know what I mean? I do like being attached to a team because it gives me a reason to watch in a lot of ways. Especially for the NBA, because I generally think the NBA product is not very good. I think there are good teams, but generally I'm not the biggest fan of the NBA as a league anymore. So I feel I have to be attached to a team to really be engaged. But my team is terrible, so I'm still at square one. I do find it interesting where the Knicks are at, just because I feel I've seen this before with other teams. There's the hope, but then actually you can look at the Bulls, really, the Derrick Rose Bulls. I was convinced I know that they lost in the Eastern Conference Finals, but in 2012, I thought that they were going to win the championship. And like, I know the Heat were there, but this was after the Heat lost to the Mavericks, and the Bulls were just as good as that Heat team, at least like throughout the regular season. And then Derrick Rose gets hurt, and like the franchise has never been the same. Like they're a disaster. You know, everything, they put all their eggs in one basket. I know the Knicks aren't doing that per se. But I was also going to say that the injury thing is interesting because as a 49ers fan, I know exactly what that feels like. Like, no jokes aside. I mean, when they played the Eagles in Philly a couple years ago, and Brock Purdy blows his elbow out on this fluke injury, you're basically watching your team's funeral for that year. You know, there's like nothing worse than injuries being so impactful on a game or a series where you already know the outcome before the game's over. You know, like with Purdy, it happened in the first quarter. There's like 45 minutes left of just watching your team lose a game. You can't do anything about it. And I don't know if it felt the same way for like Knicks fans watching Game 7 yesterday, but like after a while, you're just like, they cannot physically keep up with this other healthy team. Like there's just, you know, I would have really enjoyed like throwing it in Knicks fans' faces, but like, what can you honestly say? They were hurt. You know, that's why they lost the series, to be quite honest. You know, I'm not blind. So, I mean, it's like difficult to, as a fan, when injuries play such a significant part in the outcome of a series, it's incredibly frustrating because there's always a what if, then you're playing out scenarios. And it's like, it's annoying. It's frustrating because you know what the reason is. And then other people will say it's an excuse when really it's not an excuse. I mean, that whole team was hurt. You know what I mean? Like, and then the Pacers were healthy. And then you see like corny Halliburton like talking shit to everybody. And it's like, dude, you're playing like 2.5 healthy players. Like, relax. You know, you wore the Reggie Miller hoodie after the game, not before the game. Like, I don't know. All that's corny to me. That's corny. And I
Yeah,
don't even like the Knicks, obviously, but like you look at Halliburton, you're just like, come on, man.
I certainly agree. I mean, if you're gonna do that, like, you know, have the guts to do it when you're walking up the ramp to get into MSG, and
Right,
then if you win, like that gives you a ton of like, oh shit, like he talked his shit and then he backed it up. But then you're doing it
right.
after the game. It's like, all right, whatever. I
Yeah.
mean, like it's cool. Like I'm sure like Pacers fans obviously ate that up because it's Reggie Miller, and obviously with Reggie's history with the Knicks, I'm sure they love that. But like, if you're not a fan of the Pacers, and if you're not a fan of the Knicks, it's like, all right, whatever.
Yeah,
But
it's stupid.
I think the Knicks win that series pretty easily if they're relatively healthy and like you said, they're not playing with 2.5 guys on the court who are at full strength. But it is what it is. You know, it's I did find your tweet interesting after the game, how you brought it to the Yankees. Everybody wanted to complain last year about the injuries, and it's not an excuse. For the Knicks, it is.
Right.
It's really the reason why they lost.
Right. I mean,
And the
yeah, I
Yankees
mean,
last
part
year, it's like the Yankees weren't good last year because they had a ton of injuries and guys didn't perform to the level of expectations that fans and them themselves had for the organization. So yeah, I mean, it's injuries suck, and injuries are a big part of why teams win or lose.
right. Yeah, I mean, and this can go, part of the reason why we're like starting off with the Knicks is because we wanted to do something a little different and pose the question, is New York a Knicks town or a Yankees town? And the thing with the injuries is like really telling to me. Like, I'll answer the question first. I think it's very clearly a Yankees town. And the thing with the injuries is one of many examples for me that demonstrates that it is. And it all comes back to like standards and expectations. You know, the Yankees could never get going last year because of injuries. They are a better team in 2024 roster wise. part of the issue last year, and I'll acknowledge it, is how the roster was built. There just wasn't enough depth. There were decisions made that probably shouldn't have been made, blah, blah, blah. But they were good enough on paper to make the playoffs. And if they were healthy, they at the very least would have been fighting for a wild card spot. But, nobody wants to talk about that when it comes to the Yankees. That season was torpedoed by injuries, ultimately. I mean, even from spring training on, they dealt with injuries for a full season. The Knicks dealt with injuries for the majority of the season, I guess, since Randall got hurt. And then from that point, it just got worse health-wise. But Knicks fans were so, I don't want to say desperate, because I don't want people to take this in a derogatory way, because I honestly am not trying to start anything with anybody. But there's such a desperation to win a title because it hasn't happened in so long, and there's literal generations of Knicks fans that haven't seen it yet, that I just feel like the standards and expectations are lowered because of that desperation. And again, when I say desperation, I don't mean that in a derogatory way, but that's how it comes across as a non-Knicks fan who lives in New York. It just feels like if you have a certain level of standard and expectation for a team, that team is the primary focus of the city, just because there's a tradition, you've seen it, you've created this standard of championships, and you're always measured against that. The Knicks don't have that. I mean, there's really no other team in the city that does, outside maybe the football giants, but they haven't won in a while either. And they're a mess as well. So I just feel like people just kind of put them to the side. But in my opinion, when the standard is championship or bust and people actually mean it, like Jalen Brunson said it yesterday, but that might be his feeling on it, but that's not the organization's mantra. I mean, that's not true with James Dolan. I mean, the owner doesn't operate that way. But when it comes to the Yankees, that is absolutely how the organization and how fans and the players look at it. And that's real. To me, that just shows your grip on the city. And desperation and a really strong desire to see one doesn't necessarily mean you run the city. You're not really running anything because you haven't won anything yet. You're giving standing ovations to guys. You basically giving them a participation trophy for playing extremely hard at the end of a series, knowing that they're all hurt and they're not winning and they're not moving on. The ovation to me yesterday was also interesting. I know it was a show of appreciation and respect, and deservedly so. Again, not trying to criticize, they earned those applauses. But nobody in Yankee Stadium is giving the Yankees a standing ovation for trying hard and competing if they know that they're going to lose a series to the Astros. They're getting booed. I was there for the 2022 ALCS at Yankee Stadium, and I won't say who the coach was, but coaches and fans were going back and forth in one of the games because the Yankees were getting ready to lose. They were getting heckled left and right, and some coaches had enough. That wasn't happening at MSG yesterday. So I don't know. That's how I see it.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's a Yankees town. I think it's easy for the Knicks to capture a wide audience just because of the fact that they don't have to compete with any other team. There's few Nets fans out there. I mean, I'm sorry for the Nets fans who are listening to this, but that's just the reality of the situation. When the Knicks and Nets play each other, it's basically MSG in Brooklyn. Just with the level of noise that the Knicks get, it's just no comparison. So they don't really have a fair equal. Whereas the Mets, yeah, obviously they haven't won much, and they have been a disaster at numerous times throughout the past several decades. But there are a lot of Mets fans, and there are a lot of passionate Mets fans. And, the Yankees obviously have a huge fan base too, and it's obviously bigger than the Mets. But that's a real team that the Yankees have to compete with when it comes to audience, whereas the Knicks don't have it. And I think a lot of the times people get caught up in like how fans act outside of MSG with like the side talk videos and all that. Like that's cool and all, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's a Knicks town. And I think your point about winning plays a huge role in this. You know, for most of my life, the Knicks have been trash. Like there hasn't been much to celebrate. You know, they went to the finals in 98. I was 6 years old. And really, since then, they've been to the playoffs, obviously, a couple times, but never really had a chance to win it all. Whereas with the Yankees, it's you don't win a World Series title and, you know, the city's going to burn down. And the thing with the Yankees, too, like, I know it's probably not the best measure to, you know, talk about this conversation, but you know, sports talk radio in New York City, you're hearing about the Yankees year round. It doesn't matter if it's, you know, January or February or, you know, March. You know, some people may not be into spring training, but you're hearing about the Yankees year round, whereas the Knicks, that's not the case. So
Right.
again, it's not like I don't know if it's a great measure when we're talking, is this a Yankees or Knicks town? But, you know, I do think like that plays a small part in it, but also just the level of standards that the organizations have is a big thing. I also think a big part of this is the affordability factor. You
Yes,
can't,
agreed.
if you're a fan of both the Knicks and the Yankees, going to MSG is basically impossible unless you have like a lot of money. You know, I was looking at games and, you know, for the playoffs, and one of the reasons why I went to Philly for game 6 in the first round is because like I don't want to, like, I'm a fan, but like I don't want to spend like $600 for a ticket. I mean, it's just crazy. Like the regular fan can't afford that. Whereas with the Yankees, like, sure, it's expensive. Like, if you're coming out of town and you have to park, and parking is freaking $50 outside the stadium. And then if you're a family of four, you know, you got to pay for the concessions. You know, little Johnny wants a hat, and that's $47. But like, if you're in the city, it's much more affordable to get to a Yankee game than it is a Knicks game. Like a regular, you know, I'm sure, you know, they're playing the Mariners today. I'm sure you can get into the stadium for under $20. And then what
Right.
you spend after that is, you know, is on you. You're not getting into MSG for $20 ever. They can play the
No,
Hornets. You're not getting in for $20.
no.
Whoever they play. So I do feel like affordability is a big part of this too. Like, you know, New York City is not just Manhattan. There are other, and I'm talking like, you know, Midtown Manhattan or, you know, downtown Wall Street, whatever. Like there's a lot of different neighborhoods with varying levels of income. Like if you go to Washington Heights right now, I assume that if you go into any bodega, they're going to have Yankee stuff, way more
Right.
Yankee stuff than Knicks stuff. You go in the Bronx, obviously, you know, that's a Knicks borough. But even like Staten Island, like I'm sure like there's a lot more places in the city outside of Manhattan and like the area like I live in Hell's Kitchen. But if you go outside of, you know, this area, I'm sure like the amount of Yankee stuff you'd see in like your local bodega, your barber shop, it's more Yankee stuff, in my opinion, that you'd probably see over Knicks gear. And I feel like affordability is a big reason for that because it's just impossible to get to MSG.
Right. And I mean, there's two other things that kind of factor into it, and you touch on it a little bit, is like the Yankees are a global brand. Like it's very hard to beat a global brand. You know, like even if you're looking at fashion collaborations, I know Kith does stuff with the Knicks, and that's been successful. But you look at so many different streetwear brands, you look at like high fashion brands, they're turning to the Yankees. Like that logo is licensed in so many places that transcend sports. You know, there's something to that. You know, they're not running to the Knicks to get like the license of that logo that they have. You know what I mean? So it just has like a different presence that transcends sports, but also, and I think more importantly, when we really look at it, I think the difference in ownership like has a big thing to do with this as well. Like you mentioned that the Knicks are in really good financial position to make decisions to make their roster stronger, and that's true. But does anybody really know what James Dolan is thinking? You know what I mean? Like he still feels. I know he's been in the background for the Knicks and for the Rangers, and he's let the basketball and hockey people do their thing. Maybe that's how it's going to be moving forward. But he also has a history of doing a lot of ridiculous stuff that impacts the team or impacts the fan base. I mean, like the thing with Spike not being able to use the elevator, or like Charles Oakley being banned, and all the requirements that go into sitting in celebrity row, and the price ranges that you were talking about with the tickets. And I think this is also good perspective for Yankees fans. I don't ever have to like question where Hal's intent is. And I don't have to question, is Hal going to do something out of the blue? Is he irrational? Is he going to have some off the cuff response to something that can put the team and franchise in danger of not being able to achieve the ultimate goal of winning a championship? I don't ever have to think about that with Hal. The biggest thing that people say is Hal is cheap, which is debatable, depending on what your criteria is. And the standard, again, using that word, for the Yankees is very obvious. And they tell you what the standard is, and they promote it. It's 27 world championships. There's a sign in the stadium to let you know. It permeates throughout everything that the Yankees present to the public. The Knicks, is not the same thing. It should be if you're in New York. I mean, I think if you're a franchise in New York, and again, this still comes back to the Yankees because of their success, that should be the standard. It should be talked about. It should be pursued. There should be no other thing to really talk about for any New York team. And I'm not a fan of like the Jets or the Giants either, but it should be the same thing for them too. Same thing for the Nets. Like if you're in New York, the whole point, you want to win. So there's such a clear difference in like ownership and intent and behavior and process that if I'm a Knicks fan, I'm always kind of like not on edge, but I'm always having the back of my mind that, okay, I don't know how Dolan's going to factor into this, if he is going to factor into it, and will that impact what the team will look like moving forward? Because I do agree, unfortunately, that the Knicks are putting themselves in a good position to be legitimate title contenders. And Leon Rose has been like the best thing that's happened to that organization in years. But who knows? I mean, I can't say with 100% certainty that the owner will keep going along with it. I mean, he fired John Davidson with the Rangers out of nowhere, and then put in Drury, and it's worked out for the Rangers. But like, it's kind of like that petulance or just like reactionary kind of behavior that is always lurking around the corner with the Knicks that could help or harm the franchise.
That's a great point to make, because if you're a Yankees fan but not a Knicks fan, and you don't really pay attention to the NBA, like people want to complain about how Dolan is on like a whole nother level. He's on a different stratosphere when it comes to like wanting to complain about an owner. Like he's been horrible for many years, but he, like you mentioned with Leon Rose, who's the president of basketball operations, basically, if you're not a Knicks fan, he's the equivalent of Brian Cashman to the Knicks. And Leon has done a great job of building the roster and putting, the right people in place, trusting Tom Thibodeau, who I think is a fantastic coach. But you just never know with Dolan. Like, you just don't know. Like, it wouldn't be a surprise if he was like, yeah, I don't get along with Thibodeau anymore, so I'm just going to fire him, even though like he's the right coach for this team. You just don't know with him just because of how erratic he's been with decision making in the past. And also, he just hired Dolan hired Isaiah Thomas and Phil Jackson, who are two of the worst executives I've ever seen in my life. Just completely derailed the franchise. Yep. Like any team I watch, two of the worst by far, and it'll be hard to get close to how bad those two guys were in particular. But you just you never know with Dolan. You just don't know. He has shown in the past that if he doesn't like something, he will change it at a moment's notice. Whereas with Hal, it seems like there's definitely some thought into the decisions that the team makes. Are the Yankees sometimes too slow to make moves that they probably should have made? Yeah, but you at least know if you're watching the Yankees that there's a lot of thought that goes into their decision-making process. Whereas with the Knicks, it's not always been that case. So I just hope that like things stay status quo and Dolan can remain mostly in the background, which he's done in these past few years, because Leon and Thibodeau have done such a good job, and it would be unfortunate if that was disrupted by Dolan. And obviously, it's Dolan's team, so he can do what he wants, but hopefully it doesn't happen.
Well, as a Bulls fan, I hope it does happen because that would be great. That would be fun to watch. Just leave the Rangers alone. The Rangers still have a chance to win a championship this year and win a cup. So leave the Rangers alone. You can mess around with the Knicks. Sincerely, a Bulls fan. So on that note, we'll take this break. We'll come back and we'll get into Yankee specific talk. We'll talk about the rotation and some other things going on with the seemingly very good New York Yankees. So we'll get to that right after this break. And we're back. It's the Views from 314 Feet podcast. We won't be talking basketball anymore moving forward for those of you that were here just for the baseball. But we thought that would be a nice little curveball to throw everybody to start the show off. So focusing on the Yankees now, we're getting close to Memorial Day. The season's flying. It feels like the year's flying because now we're already near Memorial Day, which is crazy. So that feels like a good measuring point or like point in the schedule where we can start to figure out, like what things start to settle around this time. I think, you get into the plate appearances and the starts where there's a routine and things are starting to stabilize, I guess. But we thought it'd be interesting to have a conversation because it's something that people have mentioned throughout the start of the season so far in regards to the great start of the Yankees in 2024 versus the Yankees start in 2022. And if this is the same situation as 2022, or if this is different, does it feel different, or there are different contributing factors? So Chris, in your mind, and you started in 2022, right? Covering the Yankees?
Yeah, August 2022. So okay. Yeah, I'm the reason why I think that team fell apart.
Yeah, so everybody can blame Chris.
Yeah.
But you were obviously very familiar with that season and the Yankees and how it was going, then how it went. And you were around the team then, you're around the team now. Do you think that this is the same as 2022, or do you think that this is different?
I mean, I think they're similar starts in that both the offense at the start of 2022 to where we are now, May 20th, 2022, and the pitching staff from the beginning of the season to May 20th, 2022, like they're very similar starts.
Do you mean 2024 or 2022?
No, I'm talking about the 2022 season. Okay. If you're comparing the two, like they're very similar in that the offense was really good for the Yankees in 2022. The offense right now is really, really good. The pitching staff right now is very good. And then the pitching staff in 2022 up until this point is also very good. Like the bullpen was good. I was just looking at some stats. Like Clay Holmes's ERA was 0.44 on May 20th, 2022, and obviously it's 0 right now. So like there are very similar statistics that say like it's basically the same start that they had in 22. The difference is obviously the health factor. You know, in I think it was June, like the injuries started to pile up for the Yankees. So we haven't really reached that point with the 2024 version. They've basically been healthy for the entire season. Cole hasn't been available, DJ hasn't been available, and other than that, they've they've been running out like similar lineups basically every day, which we haven't seen much of with the Yankees. So, if you're looking at it like pessimistically, I know some fans are, because that's just what some Yankees fans do. They're going to be like, well, this is 2022 all over again. And, we're going to be eliminated in the wild card round. We're not even going to win the division. It's like, I don't know if that's going to happen, because a lot of this is like what we were talking about with the Knicks. A lot of this is health related. If the Yankees can stay healthy, they're going to be really good and they're going to be a World Series contender. But you just can't predict what's going to happen with health. Stanton has stayed healthy. But I think the biggest difference with the 24 version compared to the 22 version is they didn't have Juan Soto, which really makes a difference, because in 22, it got to a point, obviously, where it was just the Aaron Judge show, and the Yankees are going as Judge goes. If Judge didn't hit for a game, let's say Judge goes 0 for 4 one night, more often than not in 2022, like the Yankees were losing. Whereas with this version, it just seems like if Judge goes 0 for 4, there are players who can pick him up, because they have Soto, who's one of the best, 5 hitters in the sport. They didn't have that luxury in 22. Like Stanton to start the season in 22 was awesome. Like he was really good. But you also just knew, judging by Stanton's history, that he was going to get hurt at some point and they weren't going to have that hitter anymore. Whereas, like, let's say Stanton gets hurt today, it's like, okay, like it's a big loss with how he's performing, but it's also, I don't want to say fine, but there's just more help in the lineup. Whereas, like, they didn't really have that in 2022. They didn't have that level of hitter that can help Judge out. So that's a huge difference when you're talking about the 24 version and the 22 version of the Yankees. And then the starting rotation, like they had Jordan Montgomery and Jameson Tyone, 2 guys who we talked about just weren't going to be in the playoff rotation. With this team, like the way the guys are performing, like I can see all these guys having a realistic chance of starting a playoff game. Whereas with like Tyone and Montgomery, it's like maybe Montgomery, Tyone, no. I don't think you'd want to start him in a playoff series in any game. But like with this version of the Yankees, it's like, would you trust Carlos Rodon to pitch in a playoff game right now? Yes, like with the way he's performing. Would you trust Luis Heel? Yes, obviously. Would you trust Nestor? Yes. Clark Schmidt? Yes. Marcus Stroman? Maybe if he figures out his command. But basically, you would trust Stroman to start a playoff game. The 22 version didn't have the amount of starters that the Yankees currently have that you'd trust to start a playoff game. So there are definitely a lot of similarities and some differences, but ultimately it still comes down to health. If the Yankees are healthy, they are certainly a World Series contender.
I also think this 24 team is much more difficult to attack and game plan against. The 22 team, at least offensively, they didn't have enough lefty hitters. You could still find an area of weakness to exploit if you had the right personnel to attack them. And I feel like now with this Yankees team, there's so much more lineup balance, and the quality of the bats that they have on both the left and right side of the plate is so much better than what it was in 22 that you can't pick those lanes anymore to attack them with like hard throwing righties. You know, at some point you're going to face Juan Soto or you're going to face Alex Verdugo, who doesn't strike out much, who can grind in at bat, who's going to make contact. You have Anthony Rizzo, who's starting to, put his slow start behind him and can drive a pitch. You even have Oswaldo Cabrera that's had his moments where he's had good at bats against good pitchers, both lefty and righty, and has come through. It just feels like the diversity and quality of the lineup overall is much better than 22. And I think that the depth of the lineup is much better. You also have younger players. You also have in Austin Wells, who, hitting from the left side, despite his numbers, and we've talked about this a lot, that he's still like hitting the ball hard and like having really good at bats. He just doesn't have the numbers to like the counting stats to back that up. In 22, like you said, a lot of it was like Judge driven. A lot of it was Glaber driven outside of like that August where he thought he was getting traded and it kind of like impacted him. And he had that rough beginning to the second half of the season. They have a better shortstop. They also have better defense. I mean, like the Yankees are a better defensive team in 24 than they were in 22. They have like a good left fielder who's making a lot of nice plays in the gap towards the line, going back in Verdugo. Juan Soto has improved as an outfielder this year. Judge has been solid in center field. But the infield defense, I think, is largely better, especially at the shortstop position. I mean, that's like the obvious place to turn to.
No, because the Yankees were telling us at that point that Isaiah was one of the best
Yes.
defensive shortstops. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I think you might be wrong with that.
My bad. I'm sorry. Anthony Volpe is not as good as IKF. And I know I like tweeted the thing about IKF stabilizing the infield. I still believe that just because the context of why he was brought in and what was preceding him. Like Gleyber Torres was like me playing shortstop at the major league level. So like, I didn't agree with them getting IKF to begin with, but I understood what the logic was. And I think to his credit, even though nobody's going to agree with this, as a stopgap, IKF did enough to like kind of bridge the gap for that 1 year, because that's ultimately what happened. He was a stopgap, and they threw Volpe in there as fast as they could. Whether he was going to sink or swim, IKF was a stopgap, and it kind of worked out that way. And the team won however many games and went to the ALCS, which is something I also like wanted to point out. That 22 team gets dumped on a lot, and I know why. So I won't say I don't know why. I do understand why, but I think it's unfair. They won the division and they went to the ALCS. The problem is that they weren't as good as the Astros. The Astros are just built better roster wise than the Yankees were that year, and they didn't get the breaks to win that series. They had shortcomings, and the Astros are, quite frankly, a better team than they were, and they won the World Series. But I don't think that meant that automatically that 22 team was bad or like a fluke or something. They were a good team. Like if the Astros aren't the Astros, they have a chance to go to the World Series. I mean, I think that 22 team is viewed unfairly. I mean, they were a good team. Like you
It's
don't just
because they fell off. That's why they
right,
are
right,
viewed unfairly. It should be
right,
just because of the fact that like when you start 33 and 15, the expectations, well, they started way better than that. I forget what their record was. At one point they were like nearly 40 games over 500, I think. But
right,
when you start that way, people automatically assume that, they're the 1998 Yankees and then you have to win a World Series that year. It's just difficult to win a title. I know some fans don't want to hear it because it's like it's the messaging that, the organization has been using in the past few years, that like, the playoffs are a crapshoot. You just have to get in, and you never know. I mean, like, there's some credence to that. Like, it's true. Like, sometimes the best teams who are entering the playoffs don't win the title. Like, if you would have told me last year that the Braves would have been bounced in the first round, I would have been like, what? Because, like, they
Right.
were the best team, and then they get bounced by the Phillies. And then the
Right.
Diamondbacks get to the World Series, and then the Rangers, like, win it all. Like, yeah, like, sometimes it doesn't bounce your way, and that's just the reality of the sport, especially when you're playing a 162 game season, and then you have to beat a team in 3 games or 5 games or 7 games, no matter in depending on what round. Like, it's hard. Like, there's a
Right.
lot of variance that could happen in a series that's that short when you're comparing it to 162 games.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I just feel like whenever people bring up 2022, it's just, and I agree with you. I just think it's largely unfair. They were a very good baseball team. I mean, that 22 team was good, and there really isn't any evidence to show that they weren't good outside of them losing to a better team in a short, in a relatively short series. I mean, it happens. Like, people love to talk about the Orioles, but the last time I checked, the last time they were in the playoffs, they got swept. Like, they played 3 games or however many games it was, and then they went home. And they're given the benefit of the doubt this year when the last time we saw them in the playoffs, they got bumped right away. So I don't know. I always feel weird when people talk about the 22 team, but I do think, coming back to this question, there is a much stronger chance of this 24 team being sustainable and playing at that higher level throughout the entire season, just because the roster is better. Um, and I also think, and we'll talk about the rotation in a second. We talked a little bit about the lineup and the diversity and depth that it has. I also think that this starting rotation is more reliable and is also more diverse than the 22 rotation. The 22 rotation felt like Garrett Cole and everybody else. And with Garrett Cole not being here, we can see just how good the rotation is, but they attack you from so many different ways. Like, you mentioned this in your article, and we could talk about it soon. Luis Hill is playing, I mean, he's pitching like Garrett Cole last year. And Clark Schmidt can now attack righties and lefties. And Carlos Rodon has an expansive repertoire now where he can attack you in so many different ways. He's no longer predictable. Then you have somebody like Nestor, who's like crafty and has this deceptive fastball and relies on command. And then you have Stroman, who's kind of like a righty Nestor, in the sense that, like, he needs to like hit spots and like has to be crafty and like really pitch his way through a start. You're not getting the same look and approach in every game, and guys are executing at a high level. So, I don't really have any questions about this rotation like I did the 22 staff, where it's like, I don't know which Jordan Montgomery we're going to get today, and I don't know how Jameson Taillon is going to come out today. I don't have that question or concern with whoever pitches on any day for the Yankees right now. It's just, I know what I'm going to get. And if it doesn't happen, you're kind of surprised at this point, but you're like, okay, well, the next guy will get him tomorrow. You're not really, excuse me, you're not in a situation where you're like, well, I don't know which version of this guy I'm going to get on any given night. When I feel like that was the case in 22. And obviously the Yankees felt that way because they shipped one of the starters out, in the middle of the season. So I think the difference is the bullpen, but we've talked about the bullpen a lot. But I think the rotation is much more reliable through the first part of the season than the 22 version was.
Yes, I totally agree. I don't really have anything else to add. I think this roster is certainly capable of winning a title. I
I
mean,
agree.
just that's all there is to really say. I mean, if everybody is healthy or relatively healthy going into the playoffs, this team has enough talent to win it all. I don't know what else you can ask for about a team right now. Obviously it's early, so there's still a long way to go. But as of now, with how they're constructed, they have enough to win it all.
I agree. So we'll go to this break, our final break of this episode. We'll talk about the rotation and get to your mailbag questions. So we'll be right back after this break. And we're back. It's Randy. It's Chris. So, Chris, you wrote an article for The Athletic this morning, or it came out this morning as we're speaking, Monday, May 20th, on some of the things that have been really helping out the rotation and some of the contributing factors to the success so far. We obviously just talked about the rotation in our last segment, but can you tell us what you wrote about in your Athletic article in regards to the starting rotation?
Yeah, I mean, if you go back to spring training, there was a lot of skepticism surrounding just the state of the rotation, especially once Garrett got hurt. Because once Garrett got hurt, a lot of the focus centered on, well, the Yankees have to sign Blake Snell or Jordan Montgomery. Like, they just have to do it because they don't have enough talent in the rotation. I mean, obviously, it's turned out that they didn't need them, at least as of now, because of just how well the starters have been pitching. And it really starts with Luis Gil, who was, at the time, Garrett Cole's replacement in the starting rotation. And if you're just looking at it on the surface at the time, obviously you're thinking, well, that's not a comparison because Garrett Cole is just way better than Luis Gil. And it's just fascinating that Luis Gil's start through 9 starts this season is basically the same as Garrett Cole's start last year through his first 9 starts. I'll read you the stats. So last year, Garrett pitched 56 and 2/3 innings through his first 9 starts. Gil 49. Cole gave up 41 hits. Gil 26. Cole gave up 14 earned runs. Gil 13. They had the same number of strikeouts, 62. Cole's ERA was 2.22. Gil's is 2.39. And the batting average against Cole was 2.01. And Gil is an absurd 152. So they basically, as I wrote in the story, they replaced Garrett Cole with Garrett Cole, and which Luis Gil has been. Like, he is, he's been a prime candidate. He is a prime candidate to win Rookie of the Year. He still has eligibility because he didn't pitch enough in 21. He is also, if he continues pitching like this, he should be an all-star. And if he continues past that, again, who knows what's going to happen with him in the rotation. But if let's say he stays in the rotation, which I still think he's likely going to come out at some point. But, let's say he pitches 150 plus innings. Like, if he continues pitching like this, he's going to be a Cy Young candidate. He's been that good. So they've replaced Garrett Cole with Garrett Cole. And then also there was a ton of noise on Carlos Rodon coming into the season. He had a 6.85 ERA. The last time we saw him in 23, he's turning his back on Matt Blake in Kansas City. He's giving up 8 runs and getting no outs. And everybody is like, holy shit, this contract is a gigantic bust.
Yeah.
And This is year 1 of a 6-year deal. And everybody's like, well, the Yankees just burned $162 million. And then this year, there were so many questions, and to his credit, he's delivered. His strikeout numbers aren't what they were in 22 and 21 when he was with the Giants, and he was one of the best strikeout pitchers. But, he has found ways to get it done. He has diversified his arsenal. Prior to last year, he was basically a 2-pitch pitcher, fastball, slider. Both fastball and slider usage-wise are down this year because he's added a changeup, cutter. He uses his curveball somewhat. In Sunday's game against the White Sox, he used his changeup 18 times, the most he's ever thrown it in a game. And the White Sox had 9 swings on that changeup, and they whiffed 7 times. So it's become an effective pitch for him. And then finally, I think it should be noted with Clark Schmidt. Schmidt comes into the year coming off of a career high workload. And, you wonder just how well a pitcher is going to do after a career high in innings pitched. I go back to Nestor last year. In 22, he had a career high in workload. 23, he's dealing with injuries the entire season and was mostly ineffective. Schmidt's coming off a career high in innings pitched last year, and he's been amazing. He's taken 5 steps forward. You mentioned his ability to get lefties and righties out. Last year, he struggled with getting lefties out. His cutter, which he uses against lefties, was a work in progress. That's turned into the pitch he uses the most this year. And again, that was a pitch that he really was trying to hone in basically the entire year. And actually, this year, he's been better against left-handed hitters than right-handed hitters. So, just the entire rotation, even Nestor, I didn't write about Nestor in the article, but he had a lot of question marks too coming into the season. A lot of people thought that 22 was probably a fluke. This guy wasn't anybody. He showed signs obviously with the Yankees, but not in a stretch like he did in 22. And Nestor has answered the questions so far too. So, a lot of the focus obviously was on the offense so far this year, just because of how poor they were last year. But a lot of credit should also be given to the Yankees starting rotation. Like, they've basically kept the Yankees in every single one of their 45 games. Like, you want to talk about Carlos's outing against the Orioles, where he gave up 3 homers. I think he gave up 5 runs that day. And outside of that, there just haven't been outings from the starting rotation where it's like, well, the Yankees just don't have a chance today because, Marcus Stroman gave up 8 runs in 3 innings, and that's the game. Like that,
Right.
It just hasn't happened. So a lot of the credit also belongs to the starting rotation, and they're doing this again without Garrett Cole, which is amazing.
Right. And now they're starting to get deeper into games, which is also a good sign. So, I think part
in
of
the
it
past 7 games, I'll say this quickly. In the past 7 games, they've won 7 straight games. Each of their starting pitchers has gone at least 6 innings and given up 2 or fewer runs. If you do that, you're going to win games.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And it's a welcome sight, especially the way that they started the season this year with not giving much starter length whenever these games are going on. So that's also really encouraging, and I think it's helped out the bullpen in a lot of ways too. So yeah, all good things with the rotation. Go subscribe to The Athletic. Go read Chris's work. Be a good Yankee fan and subscribe to The Athletic. So with that, we'll jump into the mailbag. We have some really good questions this week, so we want to make sure that we hit all of them. The first one is from Simon Wah. Hey, podcast crew, love the show. Thank you very much. With Canely set to come back soon, Marinaccio option down again, Efros potentially back later in the season, Tonkin as the last arm in the pen, what does the bullpen look like by the end of the year for a potential playoff run? Do you think the team goes out and gets a high leverage arm, stands pat with the arms in-house, or something else?
I mean, they probably should go out and get at least 1 or 2 arms. Obviously they have Efros coming back at some point. Trevino had a setback. I don't know when he will return, but if he does return, that's a quality arm to have. I thought he was really good for the Yankees in 22 after that ill-fated Frankie Montas deal. Like I thought he was really good. It's so early to say like who's going to be in the bullpen or not. Like basically, like a few guys for sure are going to be in the bullpen. Clay Holmes, obviously, he's established himself as the best closer in baseball. I don't think that's like a hot take.
No, I
I
don't
mean,
either.
if you if you have a 0.00 ERA and we're almost in June, like you are the best closer in my opinion. So
I
like
agree.
he's certainly going to be in the bullpen. I mean, Luke Weaver has developed into an amazing weapon out of the pen. Like he's been one of the best relievers in the sport too. So like he if he continues on this path, that's also a really good weapon to have for the Yankees. We talked about Luis Heel. He's probably going to end up in the bullpen at some point. I know it's going to be hard. I know fans aren't going to want to hear it, but the Yankees have said from the beginning that they are going to have to monitor his workload, not necessarily put an innings limit on him, but common sense says a guy coming off Tommy John is not going to throw 170 plus innings this year. It's very, very, very unlikely to happen. So you put him in the bullpen and you have three guys, if Weaver continues pitching the way he has, that can carry you from the sixth inning onward. Because you can put Heel in for, an inning and a half or 2 innings or whatever it might be, turn it over to Weaver, who's been unbelievable, and then Holmes has been automatic this year. Outside of he gives you a few scares, but he gets the job done. So having three guys in the back of your bullpen who can lock it down for you is huge. So those three guys, Ian Hamilton's probably got a spot locked up. He hasn't been very good, but I do know that the organization believes in him. Nick Birdie, who knows? His command hasn't been that great, but I know that the Yankees do really, really like what they see. Outside of those guys, it's a toss-up. Caleb
Yeah.
Ferguson, not a given. Victor Gonzalez, not a given, because you can have Tommy Kahnle, who's basically he throws righty, but his strength is getting out lefties because of his changeup. So you don't necessarily need a left-handed pitcher if Tommy is performing well and if he's healthy, which is never the case.
All right.
But outside of Holmes, Weaver, and probably Heel, like those guys are the givens, and outside of that, I think it's up in the air.
Yeah, I mean, I'll continue to say they need to bring somebody in that can add to the swing and miss. I mean, I think the Yankees are always looking to add to the bullpen. They're always looking for arms, especially at the trade deadline. So I expect them to do the same. I mean, they even did that last year, and they had waved the white flag at the trade deadline. They still brought in a reliever. So I think they'll bring somebody in. They're bringing a high strikeout guy and add to the names that you mentioned. So I would expect some movement by the time the trade deadline comes.
I would be
All right.
surprised if they don't add a reliever. I mean, that's
Yeah,
just
so
what
would
they
I.
do. The Yankees just
Yeah,
do that.
right. Yeah, I would, and I think they need to do it. I mean, I think that's the one thing. I think that the bullpen has a ceiling, and if you can get more strikeout guys in there, then that ceiling like goes away. All right, next question from Ian Giannatino. I think I pronounced that correctly. Hey guys, with our rotation being as incredible as it has, do we see a world where we imply a six-man rotation once Cole is healthy? Even if short term, an extra day off coming back from an elbow injury would be nice for Cole to ease into things. I know Heel is the odd man out given the options remaining, but I don't see how you could justify sending him down with how locked down he's been. So we've talked about this. We talked about this on the last episode. I think this is a pretty quick answer, and they're not going to do a six-man rotation. Is that accurate to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to happen. They haven't said one way or the other, and I don't think they will until they're faced with that possibility. But when they've had this happen in the past, where they can have the possibility of going to a six-man, they haven't done that. So I assume that that's going to continue to be the case this year. And why, again, you have a clear candidate to be moved to the bullpen and Heel just because of what he went through in 21, and then rehabbing. Like, I think people also forget that Heel was optioned out of big league camp basically at the start of March because they did that because they were monitoring his recovery from Tommy John in rehab. They only went to Heel because they had a need, and he was obviously a great option with just how he was performing. But they've 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 kind of already shown you what they're going to do with Heel. If we go back to March 3rd, which I think is the date when he was optioned, they optioned him because they were being very, very cautious with his workload. So at some point, they're probably going to end up doing the same thing with his workload. Instead of optioning to minor league camp, they will, I think, send him to the bullpen.
Yeah, I agree. I don't have anything to add. I would be shocked if they went to a 6-man rotation. I know they did it like once or twice over maybe the last 10 years, but that didn't even last long. So I don't think that's happening. Okay, next question from Roger Estevez. With Verdugo going on a little slump, would the Yankees make a change in the lineup? If so, what would be the ideal new lineup? I don't think they're going to change the lineup.
No, I don't think so either.
At first, I didn't love the idea of Verdugo being the cleanup hitter, but then when I thought about it, I thought it made perfect sense, and I actually think it works. To have a high contact guy, a guy that can work at bats. He's not going to strike out much. To have him behind Soto and Judge is like actually a really smart move. And I think they should keep it that way. Just because he's having a little slump that coincided with the birth of his child, I don't think that means that they need to change the lineup around or start moving things. It's working. They're scoring a lot of runs. They're hitting a bunch of home runs. They're driving the ball. I don't know why you would change something that's working right now just because a guy, hasn't been on fire for the last like week or two. I think it makes sense. I think it's a really smart lineup adjustment that Boone made, and to his credit, it's worked. I think it's kind of unlocked the lineup a little bit. So I wouldn't change it just because he's struggling a little bit.
I totally agree. There's really no need to change it up. I don't have anything else to add. It's working. They're scoring runs. They're hitting home runs. I don't know. There's nothing to really complain about with the lineup. It's working fine.
Yeah, they're one of the best offenses in the league, which is what we thought they were going to be, but it's actually like happening now. So it's really in my opinion, and yours as well. It's just there's no reason to shake it up. They're going well. So, all right, last question from Arthur Blainville. Hi guys, thanks for this high quality podcast. Thank you, Arthur. We appreciate it. It's been a long time since the Yankees have had such a competitive bench. Who in the minor league system do you see fighting for those bench spots? I hope you've already talked about Jose Trevino in this podcast, or that you will soon. Like you guys, he's incredible right now. P.S. We need Brian Cashman on this podcast before the end of the season. We'll work on it. That would be nice. We'll work on it. It would be nice. We've talked about him a lot in the last couple of weeks, so might as well have the man on. What do you think about the bench?
I don't. We talked about Jason Dominguez. I think he's really the only candidate to, be in the mix for a bench spot or, a starter spot. But as we've talked about so many times, like I don't see that happening at this point. Oswald Peraza was reinstated from his rehab late last night, and then the team optioned him to AAA. I don't see and it's kind of crazy to say because we all expected Peraza was going to end up being the starting shortstop last year. I don't know what his role is moving forward. I don't know what they see for him in the future. The way they've handled Peraza would suggest that their words that they believe in Peraza, we think he's going to be a big part of the future. Like their words just like don't match up the actions with Peraza. I've always found that interesting with him. So I don't know what his future holds in the organization. I mean, you look at Glaber. There's probably going to be a spot open at second base next year, but Peraza, in his limited time, just hasn't shown that he has the consistent ability to hit, which is a big deal. If you can't hit, you're probably just not going to have a spot. So I don't know what the future holds for him. Dominguez, as we said, it's possible that we see him at some point. I don't think it's going to be soon, especially with how well the team is performing. There's really no need to have Dominguez up here. I know some fans probably won't like that answer, but it's just the reality. They're 33-15. They did this without Dominguez. Their outfield is fine. It's performing. Everyone is getting along. The clubhouse is fine. They don't need an injection of energy like they were needing in last season when they called up the guys when the season was over. And then even in 2022, they needed that injection of energy, and they brought up Oswaldo Cabrera. They don't need that right now with anybody in the minor league. So I don't think anyone currently is in the mix to be a bench candidate.
Yeah, I mean, they have guys on a major league roster right now that are versatile and contributing when they play. I mean, even Jahmai Jones hit a home run and had a really good game in Tampa. I think having a guy like Jones is good because he can accept the role that he's going to play once in every blue moon and be fine with it, and still have a good attitude, still work hard, and still put himself in a position to be ready to play when called upon. You're not going to put Oswald Peraza in that situation. That's counterproductive. As well as all the reasons that you gave in terms of the words that they give us publicly and their actions. So it doesn't make sense to have Peraza play the Jones role. Birdie and Cabrera combined have really contributed well. So they have that versatility and optionality. They have Trevino and Wells just going back and forth, and they're both doing well offensively and defensively. Grisham doesn't play that much. I mean, I mentioned it before. He has 40 plate appearances, and when he plays, at the very least, you're going to get really good defense in the outfield. You might not get much offensively, but he wasn't a great hitter to begin with, and also he just hasn't gotten that many at bats. So I think because of the versatility of guys and the interchangeability of guys, it's been fine. Also, LeMahieu's on his way. So that probably means Jones isn't going to be on the team for much longer as long as LeMahieu can stay healthy. So that's another piece that adds the versatility. It obviously deepens the bench. I mean, I think the guy that we're talking about is LeMahieu. He's the only one that's not there that you would expect to be there. And it just makes their bench much better because now you can move Oswaldo around more. You can use Birdie. You can finally give Rizzo some rest with LeMahieu. I mean, Rizzo's been playing a lot, which is good that he's holding up. But obviously, he's an older player. He has the back issue that could pop up in any moment. It'd be great to start giving him some rest as the season goes on. So I think the person we're really talking about is the guy that we haven't seen this year, who is DJ LeMahieu. I don't really see anybody else coming up anytime soon unless there's an injury or something crazy happens that we can't predict right now. So I don't think they need anybody. They're like you said, they're 33-15. It's working. They're playing well. Everybody's contributing. I can't think of one person that hasn't contributed in one form or fashion. Even with Grisham, he's playing good defense. So I think it's fine. I think the bench is fine.
Yeah, and I was going to mention DJ. DJ's probably going to come back at some point very, very soon. And then when that happens, he's likely taking over for Jahmai Jones's spot. And then on the roster. And then I assume that the Yankees would have him be their starting third baseman. And if that happens, then you have John Birdie and Oswaldo Cabrera on the bench. Two very, very good bench options to have.
Yep.
That's a really good two guys to have on the bench. And then you also add in Austin Wells or Jose Trevino. That's three really solid options on the bench to have. So the Yankees roster is like, if you're looking at the depth, just starting off last season, the depth was obviously a concern. Like anybody who was watching the team closely thought that, oh man, like the Yankees just don't have enough depth. Like if guys go down, they're going to be in trouble. Whereas this year, even Trent Grisham, like that's four guys who on the bench at when DJ comes back, who you can put them into the lineup and at least have some comfort that they know what they're doing.
Right.
Whereas like last
right.
year that just wasn't the case.
Right.
So that's a huge difference in terms of just comfort. If someone goes down, that there are quality options this year for when because it's going to happen. I don't think they're going to be this healthy. So like when that happens, like they do have at least quality options. And then even like again, if you want to look past the four guys who would be on the bench and Jones, Birdie, Cabrera, Grisham, and then the backup catcher, you still have Dominguez, you still have Peraza. So like there are options
Pereira.
for the Pereira. So you do have options to have if things go sideways fast.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you everyone for your mailbag questions. We appreciate it. All very good questions. And led to good discussion. So we're going to wrap up this episode of the Views from 314 Feet podcast. We appreciate everybody listening. Chris, any final words? Do you have a final words for the Knicks as our season comes to an end?
Sad ending. I mean, very, very fun season to watch. It might be the most fun I've had watching a Knicks season just all together. Again, there haven't been many high moments in my lifetime, at least. But this was a fun season. I'm going to miss it. And hopefully we'll be back next year.
Well, I'll keep my thoughts to myself on that last part.
I think they have a really good opportunity ahead of them. They just have to capitalize. Like the window to win is now with this team. So I hope they make good decisions this offseason.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Absolutely. If they make the right decisions, I think they're a title contender. I mean, I think that's pretty clear at this point. So we'll see. We'll monitor it as the summer goes on. Hopefully the Yankees keep winning as well. Thank you to everybody for listening to the podcast. You can find us on your favorite podcast platforms. You can also find us on YouTube with the same title as the podcast. Please leave us a 5-star review. Subscribe on your podcast platform. Subscribe over at YouTube. We greatly appreciate it. And we'll decide if we'll have a second episode this week. We'll let everybody know via Twitter. But if not,
probably not, because I'm going to San Diego on Thursday morning.
All right. So their answers that question. So with that in mind, our next episode will drop next Tuesday, and we will speak to you all next week.